The sound of waves fills the air. A horizon stretches endlessly before us. Wind carries the salt and mystery of open water. A single oar cuts through the surface, leaving ripples that fade into vastness. Before we had maps, before we even had words for ocean, humans built rafts and set them adrift into the endless blue. They didn't know what lay beyond the horizon, only that it called to them with a voice impossible to ignore. To leave the safety of land was madness, but to stay was to suffocate under the weight of the known world. Listen closely, and you can almost hear them still, the sound of hearts beating against ribs as canoes pushed beyond the last visible shore, the rhythm of paddles cutting water in unison, the whisper of wind filling the first crude sails, each sound a prayer, each motion an act of faith in something larger than individual survival. The first long voyages were acts of mythic courage, journeys that transformed those who undertook them. Each horizon was a new world waiting to be born into consciousness. Each failure, and there were many, became a grave swallowed by waves, a story that would never be told. The environmental challenges were almost incomprehensible to our modern minds. Storms rose without warning, turning the sea into mountains of water that could crush a vessel in seconds. Starvation crept in during the endless days of unchanging scenery, when fish refused to bite and water supplies dwindled to drops. The monotony of sea and sky could break the spirit as surely as any physical danger, days blurring into weeks where nothing changed except the slow movement of stars overhead. Yet we learned to listen. We learned to hear the whispers of waves telling us about distant shores. We felt the pull of stars guiding us through darkness. Polynesian settlers reached islands thousands of miles apart, threading their way through the Pacific with impossible accuracy. Mediterranean pioneers hugged coastlines, gradually venturing further as confidence grew, building networks of trade and knowledge that would connect civilizations. Slowly, through trial and error measured in lives lost and lessons learned, a profound realization emerged. The sea wasn't chaos. It was patterned, readable, governed by rules that could be decoded by the patient and the brave. The ocean had a language, and humans were learning to speak it. There was something philosophical happening in these voyages, something that went beyond mere survival or exploration. To navigate the sea was to navigate the self. It was the first great act of trust between mind and nature, between human consciousness and the vast external world. The ocean became a mirror reflecting our own capacity for learning, for adaptation, for turning terror into understanding. When a navigator read the stars and found their position, they were really reading the relationship between themselves and the cosmos. When they felt the swell patterns and predicted an island beyond sight, they were trusting their own senses to decode reality. What began as raw courage, as desperate necessity pushing people beyond safe shores, was transforming into something more powerful. Knowledge was being born from experience. Observation was becoming science. The human mind was proving itself capable of understanding patterns invisible to instinct alone. What began as courage became knowledge, and that knowledge would build civilizations. The sea became the first equation, a problem written in wind and water waiting to be solved. Unlike the land, where landmarks could guide and errors might be survivable, the ocean demanded precision. One mistake in judgment could mean drifting into emptiness, supplies exhausted, hope fading with each identical sunrise. So they built their courage into wood and rope, lashing together faith and determination, and trusted the stars above to guide them through the darkness. Every great leap in human history began this way, not with certainty, but with curiosity stronger than fear itself. But in that harsh demand for accuracy, something remarkable happened. Observation became systematic. Trial and error evolved into methodology. Sailors began learning to read wave interference patterns, understanding how swells from different directions created signatures that revealed hidden reefs and distant shores. They watched bird migration with scientific precision, knowing certain species never ventured more than a specific distance from land. They studied the color and taste of water, detecting river outflows and current boundaries invisible to the untrained eye. This wasn't just survival instinct anymore. This was proto-science, the beginning of the scientific method itself. Hypothesis tested against reality, patterns recognized and remembered, knowledge passed from teacher to student, refined across generations into increasingly sophisticated understanding. The ancient navigators were living algorithms, human computers processing vast amounts of environmental data without conscious thought. Their brains had become instruments, modeled through years of practice to recognize patterns in wind direction, swell characteristics, cloud formation, even the smell of the air. They could predict the unseen, extrapolating from partial information to construct mental maps of space they'd never directly observed. A subtle shift in wave rhythm might indicate land beyond the horizon. A particular star angle combined with specific wind patterns could pinpoint location within miles. They were the first data scientists, decoding chaos into predictability through nothing but observation and memory. Consider what this required. No written notes to consult, no instruments to measure, just the human mind, that extraordinary pattern recognition machine trained to such precision that it could rival any modern navigation system in certain conditions. They carried entire star maps in their heads, remembered hundreds of wave patterns, could reconstruct voyages years later from pure memory. This was human intelligence at its most refined, turned toward understanding the natural world without seeking to conquer it. They weren't forcing nature to obey human will. They were learning nature's language and speaking it fluently. Then humans looked up and found the ultimate map written across the night sky. The stars became the first GPS, eternal and unchanging, reliable when everything else shifted and flowed. The North Star held steady while the world turned beneath it, a fixed point around which all other celestial objects rotated. Star compasses emerged, mental constructs dividing the sky into houses and paths, each constellation a landmark in the heavens. Different cultures saw the same stars and created different systems of meaning, but all recognized the profound utility of celestial navigation. The Polynesians developed star compasses with over 200 stars memorized, each one a precise reference point for direction and latitude. They could look up on any clear night and know exactly where they were, where they'd been, where they were going. This is the story of those first navigators, the ones who charted the seas before compasses existed, before maps were drawn, before even belief itself had taken shape. The story of how we learned to find our way across oceans and through the vast unknown that lay before us. The Greeks crafted astrolabes, elegant instruments that brought mathematical precision to celestial observation. Arab navigators merged mathematics and astronomy into sophisticated tables and calculations, allowing for precise position fixing even in unfamiliar waters. The Vikings, sailing beneath northern skies where clouds could obscure the stars for days, discovered that certain crystals could find the sun even through overcast conditions, using polarized light to maintain direction. The heavens became both map and myth, both practical tool and spiritual guide. Constellations carried stories that helped sailors remember their positions. The movements of planets and moon added additional layers of information for those skilled enough to read them. The universe itself had become humanity's first navigation system, freely available to anyone who learned to interpret its signals. Each seafaring culture developed its own expression of navigational genius, adapted to their specific environments and needs. The Polynesian Wayfinders stand among the greatest navigators in human history. They memorized more than 200 stars, understanding not just their positions, but their rising and setting points throughout the year. They could read ocean swells by feel alone, distinguishing between multiple swell patterns intersecting from different directions, each one carrying information about distant landmasses. They navigated thousands of miles across open ocean without instruments, finding tiny islands with consistent accuracy that still amazes modern scientists. Their knowledge was holistic, integrating stars, waves, birds, clouds, watercolor, everything into a complete picture of position and direction. The Phoenicians became masters of trade routes, connecting civilizations separated by vast stretches of Mediterranean and even Atlantic waters. They established navigation networks that would shape world history, carrying not just goods, but ideas, technologies, cultural practices between distant peoples. Their knowledge of coastal navigation was unparalleled, understanding every harbor, current, and seasonal wind pattern throughout the known world. The Vikings pushed into the harsh northern seas, navigating by sun and star through waters where ice and storm made every voyage a deadly gamble. They used sunstones, crystalline minerals that could locate the sun's position even on cloudy days through polarized light. They read wave patterns reflected off distant ice sheets, navigating through fog using sound and feel as much as sight. Arab navigators brought mathematical sophistication to the sea, creating precise tables and instruments that allowed for calculated navigation rather than purely intuitive wayfinding. They merged Greek geometry, Indian mathematics, and their own astronomical observations into comprehensive navigation systems that would eventually evolve into modern techniques. Each culture saw the same stars, sailed the same fundamental ocean, but each drew a different map of meaning, found different paths to the same truth. Navigation became not just practical skill, but cultural identity, a way of understanding humanity's place in the cosmos. There was something profound happening beneath the practical techniques and cultural variations. Navigation had become a form of communication with nature itself, a conversation between human consciousness and the physical world. Imagine standing at the edge of everything you know. The land behind you is familiar, mapped by generations of footsteps and stories. But before you stretches something incomprehensible, an expanse of water so vast it seems to curve away from the world itself, disappearing into a line where sky and sea become one indistinguishable thing. The navigators listened, truly listened, to what the ocean was telling them. They asked questions through observation and received answers through experience. They learned to read the world not by forcing it to reveal its secrets, but by becoming sensitive enough to hear what it was already saying. This was intelligence married to empathy, understanding born from respect rather than conquest. They moved not against nature, but with it, finding paths within its patterns rather than trying to override them. The relationship between navigator and ocean was almost symbiotic, each responsive to the other. When a master wayfinder felt a swell pattern shift and altered course accordingly, they weren't commanding the sea to obey. They were accepting the information it freely offered and adjusting their actions in harmony with natural forces. This was wisdom as much as knowledge, a way of being in the world that modern civilization has largely forgotten. We had learned to move not against nature, but with it, becoming part of the ocean's patterns rather than obstacles to be overcome. The ocean became humanity's first network, connecting peoples and cultures long before any other form of long-distance communication existed. Trade routes carried more than goods across the waves. They carried gods and stories, genetic material and technological innovation, ideas that would spark in one place and ignite civilizations thousands of miles away. The sea was never just a barrier to be crossed. It was a medium of connection, a living highway that joined rather than separated. Island cultures influenced continental powers. Mediterranean knowledge flowed into Atlantic waters. Pacific navigators settled every habitable island across the largest ocean on Earth, creating a web of cultural connection spanning a third of the planet's surface. Navigation knowledge itself traveled these routes, techniques and tools spreading from culture to culture, each adopting and adapting what they learned to their own needs. The accumulated wisdom of generations built upon itself, knowledge from one tradition enriching another, creating an interconnected heritage of maritime understanding. This shared heritage shaped everything that followed. Civilization, as we know it, exists because humans learned to navigate the seas. Trade, exploration, migration, conquest, all of it depended on the ability to find your way across open water and return safely home. But knowledge, especially knowledge held in living memory rather than written text, is fragile. Navigation traditions that took thousands of years to develop could vanish in a single generation if not actively passed down. When European navigation instruments spread globally, many traditional wayfinding techniques began to fade. Why memorize star patterns when you have a compass? Why learn to read swells when you have charts? The old ways seemed obsolete, inefficient, unnecessary in a world of advancing technology. For prehistoric humans, the ocean wasn't just a body of water. It was the edge of the world, a living boundary between the realm of understanding and the chaos of the absolute unknown. The waves crashed with hypnotic rhythm, carrying both threat and promise in their endless motion. The sea breathed and roared and whispered, alive in ways that felt almost conscious. Polynesian navigation nearly died completely. By the mid-20th century, only a handful of master navigators remained, elderly men who remembered what younger generations had dismissed as superstition or primitive guesswork. When a traditional navigator dies, a library burns, not a building full of books, but a living repository of integrated knowledge that cannot be fully captured in writing, skills and intuitions developed over decades of practice. Then came a cultural awakening. Young Polynesians began recognizing what was being lost and sought out the remaining masters to learn the old ways. The voyaging canoe Hokulair was built and sailed using traditional navigation techniques, proving to a skeptical modern world that ancient methods worked exactly as the legends claimed. Other cultures began similar revivals, reclaiming navigation knowledge before it vanished forever. This rediscovery carried deeper significance than just preserving interesting techniques. It represented reconnection with a way of understanding the world, a relationship with nature that modern technology had severed. The knowledge was being reborn not as historical curiosity, but as living practice, skills still relevant in an age of satellites and GPS. Today, our ships follow satellites orbiting in space, but the sky has always guided us. The fundamental relationship hasn't changed, only the tools and scales involved. GPS satellites are stars we placed in the heavens ourselves, artificial celestial bodies transmitting signals we designed. We navigate by reading their broadcasts just as ancient mariners read stellar positions, though now computers do the calculations that once happened in human minds. Space exploration uses celestial mechanics and navigation principles that would be recognizable to an Arab astronomer from the 13th century, just applied across vastly greater distances. Even artificial intelligence and machine learning, technologies that seem utterly modern, mirror what ancient navigators did. They observe patterns in complex data, build models of reality from incomplete information, make predictions about conditions they cannot directly sense. The process is fundamentally similar, though the medium and scale have transformed. The human impulse to explore remains unchanged across millennia. We still stand before unknown horizons, asking what lies beyond our ability to see. We still build vessels, physical or conceptual, to carry us into that unknown. We still trust invisible forces, whether star positions or satellite signals, to guide us through uncertainty. The tools have changed. The scales have expanded from oceans to solar systems, but the essential human quality remains constant. Restless curiosity driving us outward into mystery, confidence that patterns exist within apparent chaos, willingness to venture beyond safety in search of something more. Every voyage, ancient or modern, begins with the same question: what lies beyond the line we cannot see? The horizon remains eternally ahead, moving as we move, always promising something just out of reach. It's the perfect symbol for human consciousness itself, always aware of what we don't yet know, always drawn toward expanding our understanding. What makes a human being step across such a threshold? What spark ignites in the mind that transforms terror into possibility? Logic screams to turn back, to stay behind where fire can be built and shelter found. Yet something deeper calls forward, a hunger that reason alone cannot satisfy. Ancient navigators crossed physical horizons, discovering new lands and peoples, expanding the known world one voyage at a time. Modern humanity crosses conceptual horizons, exploring inner space of consciousness and outer space of the cosmos, pushing boundaries that our ancestors couldn't have imagined. But the motivation is identical. The feeling is the same: standing before the unknown, sensing possibility beyond current understanding, choosing to venture forward despite fear and uncertainty. This is what makes us human, what has driven every significant advancement in our species' history. As long as there are horizons, literal or metaphorical, we will keep sailing toward them. As long as there are questions we cannot yet answer, we will keep building vessels to carry us toward understanding. The sea taught us this truth, wrote it into our cultural DNA through thousands of years of navigation. We are creatures of exploration, forever drawn to what we do not yet comprehend, and that truth will guide us as surely as any star. The first navigators didn't just discover new lands, they discovered what it means to be human. They showed us how to confront fear with curiosity, how to stare into the face of the unknown and find excitement rather than terror. They demonstrated that chaos contains patterns waiting to be recognized, that the world speaks to those patient and attentive enough to listen. They taught us to read the complexity of nature and find meaning within it, to trust things we cannot directly see, like the pull of distant stars or the rhythm of tides governed by an invisible moon. They proved that human minds could understand reality beyond immediate perception, that consciousness itself could expand to encompass vast scales of space and time. The story of navigation is the story of us, of restless minds forever seeking what lies beyond the next horizon, of endless curiosity driving us outward into mystery despite every logical reason to stay safe and satisfied with what we already know. Though we now sail digital seas, navigating information spaces and virtual realities our ancestors couldn't have conceived, the same truth guides us still. We are creatures of the unknown, drawn irresistibly toward questions we cannot yet answer, mysteries we have not yet solved. And we were never meant to stay on shore. The call of the horizon lives within us still, eternal and unchanging, urging us forward into the vast, unknown that awaits. The first sea voyagers left no written records, no monuments declaring their courage, but they left something more profound, evidence written into our very migration patterns, coded into our genes, scattered across islands that could only be reached by water. More than 60,000 years ago, early humans crossed open stretches of ocean to reach lands like Indonesia and Australia. They had no GPS, no weather forecasts, no rescue boats waiting beyond the reef. What they had was observation. They watched birds disappear toward distant feeding grounds and return at dusk. They studied wave patterns, noting how swells changed near hidden reefs and unseen landmasses. They felt the wind shift and learned to read its moods. Instinct slowly transformed into curiosity. Curiosity hardened into courage. And courage, repeated across generations, became knowledge encoded so deeply it felt like nature itself. These ancient travelers could read the ocean the way we read words on a page, finding meaning in what appeared to others as chaos.